Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really enduring mystery from ancient Egypt. Picture ancient Egypt, the powerhouse 18th dynasty, maybe around 1470 BCE, and there's this pharaoh, Queen Hatshepsut, a woman ruling with incredible power, focusing on trade, building amazing things, but then after she dies, her statues smashed, her name scratched out, gone. For ages, everyone thought, okay, revenge. Her stepson, Thutmose III, getting back at her for holding power. Makes a dramatic story, right? But hold on, because today we're diving into some seriously groundbreaking new research that basically flips that whole narrative on its head. It points towards something, well, something much more ritualistic, maybe even practical. So let's unpack this, because what we've found might change how you see Egyptian legacy entirely.
Absolutely. And it's such a great example of how archaeology keeps, evolving. We dig deeper, we re-examine things, and suddenly the picture changes. What looked like simple revenge starts to look like maybe a complex cultural practice we didn't fully grasp. Understanding their worldview is key. It was definitely fascinating.
It really was. So let's go back there. New Kingdom Egypt, a golden age, really. And Hatshepsut, she stands out, one of the very few women to rule as pharaoh. And she wasn't just keeping the throne warm. Her reign was about trade, diplomacy, less about constant warfare, which is kind of what you expect, like those famous expeditions she sent down to Punt, probably modern Somalia or Eritrea.
Huge undertakings.
Imagine these ships sailing off, coming back loaded with like myrrh, incense, gold, ivory.
Exotic woods, animals too, live animals, baboons, giraffes.
Wow, must have been incredible. A real display of Egypt's wealth and reach.
Definitely.
And then there's her building work, especially her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri near Luxor.
Oh, it's breathtaking. Architecturally stunning.
Totally unique, right? Those terraces carved right into the cliff face.
Exactly. And the reliefs inside are crucial. They show her divine birth, legitimizing her rule, and they depict things like that Punt expedition. Her achievements recorded for eternity.
And the whole thing with her using male pharaoh imagery, the false beard, the Neme's headdress.
That often gets misunderstood.
Yeah, people think she was trying to be a man, but it was more strategic than that, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was about fulfilling the requirements of kingship, using the established symbols of power to assert her authority in what was, let's face it, a deeply patriarchal society. She was saying, I am the pharaoh. Full stop.
Right. Makes sense.
But then, despite this incredibly successful reign, this is where the mystery starts. After her death, many of her monuments are altered. Her name gets systematically chipped away. Statues are broken, not just one or two, but lots of them.
And that's where the old story comes, and Thutmose III, the stepson, finally gets his revenge, erasing her legacy out of bitterness.
That's been the dominant theory for centuries. It's dramatic, it's personal, it makes a good story.
Yeah.
But you have to ask, was it really just personal feelings, or was something else going on? Something rooted in their culture, their beliefs?
Exactly. And that question is what this new study, the one from 2025 led by Jun Yi Wong at the University of Toronto, really dives into. They didn't just rehash theories. They went back to the physical evidence, the actual broken pieces of statues.
Stuff excavated way back in the 1920s by Winlock for the Met Museum. Pieces now scattered in museums worldwide.
Right. Tiny fragments holding potentially huge clues. They just needed a fresh look, challenging those old assumptions. And this research got noticed, published in various places.
It really shook things up.
So what was Wong's approach? What did they actually do with these fragments?
Well, the core of it was a really meticulous reanalysis of the damage, looking closely at how these statues were broken.
Okay.
And what they found was fascinating. The damage wasn't random. It wasn't just, mindless smashing. There was a pattern, a very specific, consistent pattern. The statues were often broken at the neck, the waist, and the knees.
Neck, waist, knees. Okay, why those specific points? Seems kind of arbitrary.
To us, maybe, but not to the ancient Egyptians. It ties directly into their belief in the Ka.
The Ka, that's the life force or the spirit double.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They believed the Ka, this essential life energy, could actually inhabit a statue of the deceased. The statue was like a vessel.
Okay.
So breaking the statue at those points, neck, waist, knees, wasn't necessarily about hatred. It seems to have been a ritual act, a way to sort of deactivate the statue.
Deactivate, like switching it off.
Kinda, yeah. To neutralize the Ka's power, maybe prevent it from interfering in the world of the living, or perhaps to allow the Ka to fully transition to the afterlife without being anchored to the statue.
Huh. So it's a spiritual safety measure almost.
That's a good way to put it. It's managing the potent spiritual energy associated with the pharaoh, even after death. It aligns perfectly with their known beliefs about imagery and the afterlife. It's less about rage, more about ritual procedure.
Wow. Okay, that completely changes the feeling of it. It's not just destruction, it's
Yeah.
controlled, methodical. Like you can almost imagine them having a checklist,
Yeah.
neck, check, waist, check, knees, check, following a protocol.
It certainly looks that way based on the evidence. And critically, this wasn't just done to Hatshepsut's statues.
Ah, okay, so it wasn't unique to her.
No, and that's a huge blow to the personal revenge theory. Think about the Karnak cachette.
Right, where they found hundreds of statues buried together.
Exactly. Hundreds of statues from many different pharaohs, different times, and guess what? Many of them show the same damage pattern. Neck, waist, knees.
So it was standard practice.
It looked like a standard ritual practice for decommissioning royal statues when they were no longer needed, or perhaps when clearing space. It wasn't personal animosity, it was cultural norm. We even see similar things later, like during Akhenaten's time, statues destroyed for religious reasons, then his own statues attacked after his death. Statue modification was a known tool in their cultural kit.
Okay, so ritual deactivation makes sense, but wasn't there something else the study found, something more practical?
Yes, absolutely. Beyond the ritual aspect, Wong's team found clear evidence of reuse, material recycling.
Recycling statues.
They identified specific tool marks on many fragments, chisel marks, cutting marks. It shows the stone wasn't just smashed, it was being worked, shaped for other purposes.
Like for new buildings.
Precisely. And the clincher. Some of these very fragments of Hatshepsut's statues were found used as fill material underneath Thutmose III's own causeway at Karnak.
Wait, under his own construction project?
Right there, built into the foundations. That strongly suggests they weren't just destroying her memory out of spite, they were pragmatically reusing valuable stone. Why waste good granite or sandstone?
That's incredibly practical, almost mundane in a way.
It paints a very different picture of Thutmose III, doesn't it? Not just a vengeful successor, but maybe a pragmatic ruler managing resources according to custom.
It really does. And there was that detail about the faces, too, right?
Yeah, that was interesting. They noted that statues where the face was more intact tended to have less overall damage, whereas pieces that were already broken into smaller bits often showed more damage to the face, likely from the process of, cutting them up and moving them around for reuse.
So the facial damage might have been more incidental, happening during the recycling process, rather than a deliberate attempt to obliterate her image.
It certainly suggests that. If the main goal was simply reuse, the breaks would be functional first, not necessarily targeted at the face unless it got damaged along the way. It fits the practical recycling idea better than pure targeted defacement.
Okay, so taking all this together, what does it really mean for how we understand Hatshepsut and maybe even how we look at history?
Well, it fundamentally shifts her story, doesn't it? It
Yep.
moves away from this narrative of her being uniquely targeted because she was a powerful woman, erased by a resentful man.
Yeah.
Instead, her treatment seems to align with a broader cultural practice applied to pharaohs, male or female. It was a combination of ritual belief deactivating the kata and practical necessity reusing materials.
It feels less like a personal tragedy and more like, well, like part of the system.
Exactly. And it cautions us against projecting our modern ideas about revenge or gender politics onto the past too easily. Their motivations were complex, rooted in their world.
And it certainly makes Thutmose III seem less like a villain.
It humanizes him, I think. Shows him as a ruler operating within the traditions and practical constraints of his time. It highlights just how vital archaeological context is, looking at the how and where things were found, not just the what.
Those shades of gray you mentioned earlier, or shades of sandstone.
Precisely. History is rarely simple. The real story often lies in those subtle details, the patterns in the damage, the location of a fragment.
It's funny, the recycling aspect makes me think of today, like how we take apart old phones for the materials inside.
It's not a bad analogy, actually. A different technology, a different belief system, but a similar principle of decommissioning something powerful and repurposing its components. It shows a certain continuity in human ingenuity and practicality across millennia.
So wrapping this up then, the big takeaway from this deep dive is that the destruction of Hatshepsut's statues probably wasn't the act of pure vengeance we thought. It looks much more like a mix of sophisticated ritual, this Kodi deactivation, and straightforward practical recycling of valuable stone.
A standard procedure, not a personal vendetta.
And understanding that actually gives us a richer picture of ancient Egypt, right? Their complex beliefs about life, death, power, and even their resourcefulness.
Absolutely. It doesn't diminish Hatshepsut at all. It just places her story within its proper, complex cultural context. It reminds us that the past is constantly being reevaluated.
New discoveries, new analyses, they keep changing the picture.
Exactly. Even when something seems set in stone, pardon the pun, our understanding of it can evolve dramatically. History is a living field of inquiry.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What other stories from history, narratives we've accepted for generations, might be completely different if we just looked at the evidence again, maybe with fresh eyes or new techniques?
That's the exciting part. There's always more to uncover, more layers to peel back.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring.